Struggling to quiet your racing mind? Rest now. Let the story carry you into a deep and peaceful sleep. Tonight we're journeying into the wilderness, discovering the forgotten skills that kept frontiersmen alive, not just through strength, but through a deep, quiet understanding of the land. Close your eyes. Picture this. The forest stretches endlessly, a quiet sea of green and shadow. In this wilderness, survival is a negotiation with the land, a whispering agreement between man and nature. Over time, those who listened closely learned to read the signs, the bend of a blade of grass, the hush of bird song. These were the words of the wild, and those who understood them could find their way. Eli had always known this. His life depended on it. He moved through the trees not as a conqueror, but as a guest. He taught me that the most important skill wasn't how to build a fire or trap a beaver, but how to truly see. To see the world not as I wished it to be, but as it was, raw, beautiful, and unrelenting. As I lay back on my bedroll beneath the open sky, the stars blinked into view, unfiltered by city lights. The air was cool, scented with pine and river mist. My body ached, but it was a good ache, the kind that reminded me I was alive. Sleep came slowly, like a leaf drifting on a gentle stream. I thought of the man I had been when I left the city. That version of me felt like a stranger now. Soft, uncertain, full of romantic notions about the frontier. I had come seeking adventure, but what I found was something quieter, deeper. Eli shifted nearby, already half asleep. I watched the firelight flicker across his weathered face and wondered what he saw when he looked at me. A student? A burden? Or perhaps just another soul trying to find his place in a world that didn't promise safety, only truth. I closed my eyes, letting the sounds of the forest lull me. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The river whispered its secrets, and I, for the first time in weeks, felt at peace. The morning came softly, not with a jolt, but with a hush. A pale mist curled through the trees, wrapping the forest in a silvery veil. I stirred beneath my blanket, the scent of pine and wood smoke lingering. My body, though sore, felt stronger. Each step, each task, each lesson from Eli had carved away the softness of city life, revealing something leaner, more grounded. Eli was already awake, sharpening his knife by the fire with slow, deliberate strokes. We didn't need to speak. The silence between us was full of understanding. The fire crackled, sending lazy sparks into the morning sky. There was something sacred in these quiet moments. No rush, no noise, no demands. Just the rhythm of breath, the warmth of flame, the slow unfolding of a day that asked only for presence. The crowded streets and ticking clocks of my old life felt so far away now. Out here, the world made more sense. It didn't lie, it didn't pretend, it simply was. Eli finally looked over, his voice low and calm. "We'll check the traps after breakfast, then move west." I nodded, grateful for the simplicity. One step at a time. That was how you survived. That was how you found peace. As I added a few sticks to the fire, I felt a quiet resolve settle in my chest. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was learning to live. Our morning meal was simple: dried meat and a cup of pine needle tea, its warmth seeping into my hands. The steam curled upward, catching the light like a spirit rising from the earth. "We'll follow the ridge," Eli said, his voice low. "Should be good sign near the creek bend." I nodded. I had learned that out here, understanding came not from asking questions, but from walking the path. The land would teach me. We packed our things in silence, the rhythm of the task now familiar. My hands moved without needing to think, rolling the bedroll, tying the pack, checking the rifle. These small rituals grounded me. As we set off, the forest welcomed us with its quiet song. I found myself watching Eli. His steps were sure, his eyes always scanning, reading the land like a book he'd memorized. A part of me still clung to the idea that I was just visiting this life, that I would return to the city. But another part, the quieter, deeper part, was beginning to wonder if I had already crossed a threshold I couldn't uncross. The trail narrowed as we climbed, revealing glimpses of the valley below. A river wound its way through the land like a silver thread. Eli paused at the crest of the ridge. He didn't say anything, just nodded toward the view. I stood beside him, breathing in the cool air, and felt something shift inside me. The noise of the world I had left behind seemed to fade, replaced by the steady pulse of the earth. We stood there, two figures on the edge of something vast, and for the first time, I didn't feel lost. The descent from the ridge was slow and careful. The scent of damp earth and moss filled my lungs, grounding me. I found myself thinking less about the destination and more about the rhythm of the journey. Eli paused at a bend in the trail, crouching low. "Tracks," he murmured, brushing away pine needles. "Elk, maybe a day old." To me, the forest floor was a random tangle. To Eli, it was a story. I envied that, not just the skill, but the way he belonged here. We stopped to rest in a small clearing. Eli dropped his pack and sat on a fallen log. I joined him, grateful for the break. The sun was high, casting dappled light across the forest floor. Eli spoke without looking at me. "You're doing better." The words caught me off guard. Praise from him was rare. "Thanks," I said softly. He nodded once, then fell silent again. I closed my eyes, letting the quiet settle around me. In that moment, I felt a contentment that grows in the spaces between effort and stillness. The kind that whispers, "You're exactly where you need to be." We moved again, following a narrow trail that wound through the trees. The forest grew quieter, as if holding its breath. Eventually, we came upon a small hidden glade. A stream meandered through it, its waters clear and slow. Wildflowers dotted the banks, swaying gently. "Good place to wait," Eli said simply, lowering himself onto a moss-covered rock. I sat beside him, my pack sliding from my shoulders. The stream's gentle murmur filled the space between us. A pair of deer stepped cautiously from the trees, drank from the stream, and then melted back into the forest, silent as mist. I wondered how many such places I had passed by in my life without noticing. Here, time didn't press. It unfolded. Eli broke the silence. "This place, it doesn't ask anything of you, just that you be still, just that you listen." He was right. The forest didn't demand. It offered. I lay back in the grass, the blades cool against my skin. Above me, the sky was a soft blue. My eyes drifted closed, and I let myself float. Not asleep, not awake, just resting in the hush of the world. The stream sang its song. The wind whispered through the trees, and the earth held me gently, as if to say, "You are safe here. You are enough. Rest now. Let the story carry you into a deep and peaceful sleep." If you've enjoyed this journey, please give it a like and subscribe for more gentle stories to help you unwind. Sleep well. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long golden beams through the trees. The forest glowed with a quiet warmth, as if the earth itself were exhaling after a long day. Shadows stretched like fingers across the mossy ground, and the air took on that cool, clean scent. We followed the stream for a while, its gentle babble a constant companion. I found myself walking more slowly, not from fatigue, but from a desire to linger. Every bend in the water revealed something new. A fallen log draped in lichen, a heron standing still as stone, the glint of fish just beneath the surface. Eli didn't rush me. He seemed to understand. Maybe he felt it too, that this was a moment to be savored, not hurried. Eventually, we came to a small rise overlooking the valley. From here, the land opened wide, a patchwork of forest, meadow, and winding river. The sky above was painted in soft hues of lavender and rose, the first stars beginning to blink into view. We made camp beneath a stand of tall pines. Eli gathered wood while I cleared a space for the fire. The work was quiet, unspoken, but not lonely. There was a rhythm to it now, a shared understanding that needed no words. As the fire crackled to life, I sat back and watched the flames dance. The warmth seeped into my bones, chasing away the chill of the evening. Eli sat across from me, his face lit by the firelight, eyes distant but calm. I found myself thinking about the stars. how they had watched over this land long before we arrived, and would continue to do so long after we were gone. There was comfort in that, in knowing that some things endure. "Do you ever miss it?" I asked quietly. "The world out there?" Eli didn't answer right away. He poked at the fire with a stick, sending a shower of sparks into the night. "Sometimes," he said at last, "but not often. Out here, things make sense. You take what you need. You give back what you can. You listen. You learn. You live." I nodded, letting his words settle in. I thought about the life I had left behind, the noise, the rush, the constant reaching for something just out of grasp. And I thought about this life, where each day was a lesson in presence, in patience, in humility. The fire popped softly. An owl called from somewhere in the trees. The stars above multiplied, filling the sky with quiet light. I lay back on my bedroll, the earth firm beneath me, the sky endless above. My thoughts drifted like leaves on the stream, slow and unhurried. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for now, in this moment, I was exactly where I needed to be. Night had fully settled over the forest, wrapping the world in a velvet hush. The fire had burned low, its embers glowing like tiny stars scattered across the ground. Above us, the real stars shimmered in the vast sky, more numerous and brilliant than I had ever seen from the city. I lay on my back, my hands folded behind my head, watching the constellations slowly drift across the heavens. The Milky Way stretched like a river of light, a soft band of silver dust that seemed to pulse with quiet life. It was humbling and oddly comforting to feel so small beneath it all. The forest was alive, but not loud. The gentle hoot of an owl echoed from somewhere deep in the trees. A breeze stirred the pine branches above, their needles whispering secrets to one another. In the distance, a stream murmured its endless lullaby, weaving through the darkness like a thread of music. I closed my eyes and listened. There was a rhythm to it all. The rustle of leaves, the occasional crack of a twig, the soft sigh of wind moving through the underbrush. It was as if the forest itself was breathing, slow and steady, inviting me to do the same. Eli sat nearby, still tending the fire with quiet care. The glow lit his face in warm tones, his eyes reflecting the flames like twin lanterns. He looked at peace, as if he belonged to this place in a way I could only hope to understand. I turned my gaze back to the stars. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of the trees and the mountains, the world I had known continued on. Its lights, its noise, its endless motion. But here in this clearing, time had slowed, or maybe it had stopped altogether. I felt the earth beneath me, solid and cool. I felt the air on my skin, crisp and clean. I felt the quiet within me, growing stronger with each breath. And as the fire crackled softly and the stars wheeled overhead, I let go of the day. The fire had dwindled to a soft glow, its warmth now more suggestion than substance. I pulled my blanket tighter around my shoulders and sat up, gazing out into the darkened forest. The trees stood like sentinels, their tall forms silhouetted against the starlit sky. They didn't move, but I could feel their presence, steady, ancient and kind. A hush had fallen over the land, the kind of silence that wasn't empty, but full of life just beyond the edge of hearing. Somewhere, a fox padded silently through the underbrush. A breeze stirred the treetops, and the faint rustle of pine needles sounded like a lullaby whispered by the earth itself. I found myself thinking about how different the world felt at night. In the city, darkness brought noise, sirens, headlights, the hum of distant traffic. But here, night was a gentle thing. It didn't press in. It opened up. I stood and walked a few steps from the fire, careful not to disturb Eli, who was already lying down, his hat pulled low over his eyes. I didn't want to sleep just yet. I wanted to remember this moment, to let it settle into me like dew on the grass. The moon had risen, casting a silver sheen across the clearing. The stream shimmered in its light, winding like a ribbon through the trees. I crouched beside it, dipping my fingers into the cool water. It flowed around them without resistance, soft and sure, always moving forward. I watched the current for a long time, letting my thoughts drift with it. I thought about the path that had brought me here, the choices, the doubts, the quiet longing for something more. I hadn't known what I was searching for when I left home. But now, in the stillness of this place, I was beginning to understand. It wasn't adventure I had needed. It was quiet. It was space to breathe. It was the chance to listen to the world and to myself without interruption. I stood again and looked up at the stars. They blinked down at me, ancient and unhurried. I imagined them watching over this land for centuries, bearing witness to the lives that passed beneath them, trappers, travelers, dreamers like me. Back at the fire, I settled into my bedroll. The earth was firm, but familiar now. The night air was crisp, but no longer biting. I closed my eyes, and the sounds of the forest wrapped around me like a blanket. Sleep came not as an escape, but as a return to something simple, something true. And as I drifted off, I carried with me the hush of the trees, the song of the stream, and the quiet certainty that I was exactly where I was meant to be. The night passed slowly, not in discomfort, but in a kind of suspended stillness. I drifted in and out of sleep, each time waking to a different sound, the soft hoot of an owl, the distant yip of a fox, the rustle of leaves stirred by a passing breeze. Each sound felt like a lullaby, a reminder that I was not alone, that the forest was always awake, always watching. At some point, I opened my eyes to find the stars beginning to fade. The sky had shifted from black to a deep velvety blue, and a faint glow touched the eastern horizon. Dawn was coming, slow and shy, like a child peeking around a corner. I sat up, pulling the blanket around my shoulders. The fire had gone cold, but the memory of its warmth lingered in the earth beneath me. Eli was still asleep, his breathing steady, his form barely visible in the dim light. I stood and walked a little way from camp, drawn by the quiet promise of morning. The forest was hushed, as if it too was waiting for the sun. The trees stood tall and still, their trunks silvered by the moonlight, their branches outlined against the paling sky. I found a spot near the stream and sat on a smooth stone, watching the water slip by. It moved with such grace, never rushing, never hesitating, just flowing, always forward, always home. A bird called softly from a nearby branch, its song tentative, like the first note of a symphony. Another answered, then another, until the forest was filled with a gentle chorus of waking life. The light grew stronger, painting the world in soft golds and pinks. Mist rose from the ground in slow, swirling tendrils, catching the light and turning the glade into something dreamlike. I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of damp earth and pine. My thoughts were quiet, my heart steady. There was no urgency here, no need to be anywhere but this moment. Behind me, I heard Eli stir, the familiar sound of him rising, stretching, brushing off the night. I didn't turn. I just listened, letting the sounds of our small camp blend with the music of the morning. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and calm. "Good light today," he said. "We'll make good time." I nodded, still watching the stream. "It's beautiful," I whispered, more to myself than to him. Eli stepped beside me, following my gaze. "It always is," he said, "if you're quiet enough to see it." And in that moment, I understood. The forest didn't change. I did. The more I slowed, the more I listened, the more the world opened up to me, not as a place to conquer, but as a place to belong. The sun crested the horizon with a hush, spilling golden light across the treetops. It touched the forest slowly, like a hand brushing over the land, waking it with warmth and color. The mist that had clung to the earth began to lift, revealing the soft greens and browns of moss, bark, and fern. Back at camp, Eli moved with his usual quiet efficiency. He stoked the fire back to life with a few dry twigs, coaxing the embers into flame. The scent of smoke and pine mingled in the air, grounding me in the moment. I sat nearby, sipping the last of the pine tea from my tin cup. The warmth of it spread through me, not just in body, but in spirit. I felt calm, present, as if the forest had gently pressed its rhythm into my bones. Eli glanced over. "We'll follow the river today," he said. "See what it has to show us." I nodded. I had learned that rivers were more than just water. They were guides, storytellers. They carved the land, fed the trees, and whispered secrets to those who walked beside them. We packed our things in silence, the morning light dappling our gear. My hands moved with practiced ease, tying knots, folding blankets, checking the rifle. These small rituals had become a kind of meditation, each motion a step deeper into this life. As we set off, the forest opened before us like a book. The trail was soft beneath our boots, the air cool and clean. Birds flitted from branch to branch, their songs weaving through the trees like threads of light. The river soon came into view, its surface catching the sunlight in shimmering ripples. It moved with quiet confidence, curving through the valley with grace. We walked beside it, our reflections dancing on the water surface. I found myself thinking about how much I had changed. When I first arrived, every sound had startled me. Every shadow had seemed a threat. But now I moved with the land, not against it. I listened more. I needed less. I felt lighter. Eli paused at a bend in the river, crouching to examine the muddy bank. "Tracks," he murmured. "Beaver. Fresh." I knelt beside him, peering at the small, webbed prints. They were delicate, almost like calligraphy pressed into the earth. A story written in silence. We followed the trail a little farther, until we found a quiet spot where the river widened and slowed. A perfect place to rest, to watch, to learn. Eli sat on a flat rock and pulled out a small piece of pemmican. "We'll wait here a while," he said. "Let the land speak." I sat beside him, letting the stillness settle around me. The river flowed. The wind stirred the leaves, and somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker tapped out its rhythm on a hollow tree. I closed my eyes and breathed in the moment. There was no rush, no destination more important than this one. Just the quiet companionship of a man who had made peace with the wild and the gentle unfolding of a day that asked only for presence. The river had a voice of its own, soft, steady, and endlessly patient. As we sat beside it, I let its rhythm settle into me, like a lullaby hummed by the earth. The water moved with grace, curling around smooth stones, whispering over fallen branches, and pooling in quiet eddies that mirrored the sky. I dipped my fingers into the current. It was cool and clear, the kind of cold that woke the skin but soothed the spirit. Tiny bubbles clung to my fingertips before drifting away, carried downstream like thoughts I no longer needed to hold. The air was rich with the scent of wet stone, river grass, and the faint sweetness of wild mint growing along the bank. I leaned closer, brushing my hand through the tall blades, releasing their fragrance into the morning breeze. It mingled with the earthy aroma of damp soil and the faint smoke from our earlier fire, creating a perfume no bottle could ever hold. Sunlight filtered through the canopy above, dappling the water in shifting patterns of gold and green. Dragonflies skimmed the surface, their wings catching the light like shards of glass. A trout broke the surface with a quiet splash, sending ripples across the mirrored sky. I closed my eyes and listened, not just with my ears, but with my whole body. The rustle of leaves, the distant call of a thrush, the gentle lap of water against the shore. Even the silence between sounds felt full, like the pause between heartbeats. Eli sat nearby, sharpening his knife with slow, deliberate strokes. The rasp of stone against steel blended with the river's song, another note in the forest's quiet symphony. He didn't speak, and neither did I. There was no need. The world was speaking for us. I lay back on the mossy bank, the ground soft and cool beneath me. The scent of the river clung to my clothes, a reminder that I was part of this place now, not just passing through, but belonging, even if only for a while. Above me, the sky stretched wide and blue, a canvas brushed with the faintest wisps of cloud. I watched them drift, slow and aimless, like thoughts with nowhere to be. And in that moment, I felt it again. That deep, quiet peace that comes when you stop trying to hold the world together and simply let it hold you. The sun had risen higher now, casting long beams of light through the trees like golden bridges between earth and sky. Every leaf shimmered with dew, every branch swayed with purpose. The world was alive, but not hurried. The forest had awakened fully, but not with noise, with presence. We walked in silence, following the river's curve as it led us deeper into the valley. The path was soft beneath our boots, a mixture of pine needles, damp soil, and the occasional crunch of twigs. The scent of the morning lingered, fresh water, sun-warmed bark, and the faint sweetness of wildflowers opening to the light. I found myself watching the way Eli moved. There was no wasted motion in him. Every step, every glance, every pause was deliberate. He didn't force his way through the land, he flowed with it, like the river beside us. I tried to match his rhythm, not just in pace, but in presence. To walk not as a visitor, but as someone who belonged. To notice the way the moss grew thicker on the north side of the trees. To hear the difference between the call of a jay and the warning cry of a squirrel. To feel the shift in the air when the wind changed direction. We stopped at a bend where the river widened into a still pool. The surface was glassy, reflecting the sky and trees with perfect clarity. A heron stood at the far edge, motionless, its long neck curved like a question mark. It watched us with calm eyes, then lifted into the air with a slow, powerful beat of its wings, gliding silently over the water. Eli crouched by the bank, filling his canteen. I joined him, kneeling beside the water. I cupped my hands and drank, the coldness of the stream shocking and pure. It tasted of stone and sky, of snowmelt and time. A butterfly fluttered past, its wings a blur of orange and black. As we rested, I let my gaze wander. A breeze stirred the tall grasses, sending ripples across the pool. Somewhere nearby, a woodpecker tapped out a rhythm on a hollow trunk. I leaned back against a sun-warmed rock and closed my eyes. The warmth soaked into my back, the coolness of the river kissed my skin, and the sounds of the forest wrapped around me like a soft blanket. Eli spoke, his voice low and thoughtful. "You're learning to listen." I opened my eyes and looked at him. "I think I'm starting to hear." He nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "That's where it begins." And in that moment, I understood. The wilderness wasn't something to be conquered or endured. It was something to be heard, to be felt, to be known. And slowly, gently, it was beginning to know me too. The sun had climbed higher, casting a soft warmth over the valley. The river, now sparkling in the full light of day, moved with a quiet confidence, its surface broken only by the occasional swirl of current or the leap of a fish. The forest around us had settled into its daytime rhythm. Less song, more rustle, more hum. Eli stood at the edge of the water, scanning the far bank. "We'll cross here," he said, his voice calm, as if the river were no more than a path through a meadow. I looked at the water, wide and slow-moving, its depths uncertain. The idea of crossing it stirred a flicker of unease in my chest. But I trusted him. I had learned to. We gathered fallen branches and driftwood, tying them together with strips of bark and cord from Eli's pack. The work was quiet, methodical. My hands moved with more confidence now, the motions familiar. I could feel the strength in my arms, the steadiness in my breath. I was no longer the same man who had stumbled into this wilderness weeks ago. As we worked, the sun filtered through the trees, dappling our makeshift raft in shifting patterns of light. The scent of the river, clean and mineral-rich, mingled with the earthy aroma of damp wood and sun-warmed pine. A breeze stirred the leaves above, and I paused to listen, letting the sound wash over me like a song I didn't need to understand. Eli tested the raft with a firm push. It bobbed gently but held together. "It'll do," he said, and I could hear the quiet approval in his voice. We loaded our packs and stepped onto the raft, kneeling low to keep our balance. The river welcomed us with a soft lapping against the wood, its current nudging us forward. I dipped a branch into the water, using it to steer, mimicking Eli's movements. The crossing was slow but peaceful. The forest drifted past on either side, its reflection rippling in the water. I watched a pair of ducks glide by, unbothered by our presence. Overhead, a hawk circled, its cry echoing faintly through the trees. Halfway across, I paused to look back. The far bank was already fading into the distance, the place we had rested now just a memory. I felt a quiet ache, not of loss, but of gratitude. That place had given me something: stillness, clarity, a sense of belonging. Eli caught my eye and nodded toward the shore ahead. "Keep your eyes forward," he said gently. "The river only flows one way." I smiled, understanding the deeper meaning in his words. The journey wasn't just about where we were going. It was about how we moved through it, present, open, and unafraid. As we reached the far bank and stepped onto solid ground, I felt the sun on my face and the earth beneath my feet. The forest welcomed us once more, and I followed Eli into the trees, ready for whatever the day would bring. The forest on the far side of the river felt different, denser, older, as though it had been waiting for us. The trees stood closer together, their trunks thick with age, their roots weaving through the earth like veins. The air was cooler here, shaded and still, filled with the scent of cedar and damp moss. We moved slowly, careful not to disturb the hush. Every step was deliberate, every sound magnified. The creak of leather, the soft thud of boots on loam, the occasional snap of a twig beneath foot. Eli led us to a small rise overlooking a bend in the river. Even the birds seemed quieter here, their songs more distant, more reverent. "Good place to set up," he said, scanning the terrain. "Close to water, high enough to stay dry." We began to work, gathering branches and pine boughs for a shelter. The labor was steady, unhurried. My hands moved with growing confidence, tying knots, stacking wood, weaving the boughs into a sloped roof that would keep the rain at bay. The scent of sap clung to my fingers, sharp and clean. As we worked, I found myself slipping into a rhythm, not just with the task, but with the world around me. The forest wasn't something separate anymore. It was part of me, and I was part of it. The wind cooled my skin, the earth supported my weight, the trees offered shelter, and in return, I moved gently, respectfully, adding only what was needed, leaving the rest untouched. When the shelter was finished, we stood back and admired it. It wasn't much, just a lean-to of branches and pine, but it felt solid, safe. A home, if only for a night. Eli gave a small nod. "You're getting the hang of it." I smiled, the praise warming me more than the sun. "It feels good," I said, "to build something with my hands, to know it'll keep us dry." He looked at me, his eyes thoughtful. "That's the thing about this life. It teaches you what matters. Not what's easy, not what's fast, just what's true." We sat by the river again, watching the light shift through the trees. The water moved slowly now, its surface dappled with sunlight and shadow. I dipped my hands in, letting the coolness wash away the sweat and sap. A trout flickered beneath the surface, then vanished into the deeper current. I leaned back against a smooth stone, the warmth of the day sinking into my skin. My body was tired, but it was a good tired, the kind that comes from honest work, from being useful, from belonging. And as the breeze stirred the leaves above and the river sang its endless song, I felt a quiet joy settle in my chest. Not loud or sudden, but deep and steady. The kind of joy that doesn't need to be spoken, the kind that simply is. The shelter stood quietly among the trees, its pine boughs rustling gently in the breeze. It wasn't grand or elaborate, but it was ours, built with care, shaped by hand, and nestled into the land like it had always belonged there. Eli stepped back, brushing pine needles from his sleeves. "Not bad," he said, his voice low and even. "Tight seams. Good pitch on the roof. Should shed rain just fine." I looked at it, feeling a quiet pride rise in my chest. It's the first thing I've built that might actually keep someone warm and dry. He gave a small nod, then ran his hand along one of the support beams. "You'll find that out here. Simple things matter more than they do back east. A dry place to sleep, a fire that holds through the night, water that doesn't make you sick. That's wealth." I crouched at the entrance, brushing aside a few stray twigs. The scent of fresh pine filled the air, clean and sharp. Inside, the ground was soft with moss and layered boughs. the kind of bed that welcomed tired bones. I used to think comfort meant soft sheets and silence, I said, half to myself. But this feels more real. Eli chuckled, a rare sound, low and warm. You'll sleep better here than you ever did in a feather bed, trust me. I looked up at him. Did you build your first shelter like this? He nodded slowly, eyes distant. Worse, actually. Leaked like a sieve. Woke up soaked and shivering. Took me a few tries to get it right. I smiled. So there's hope for me yet. There's always hope, he said, as long as you're willing to learn. We sat by the fire again, watching the shadows lengthen as the sun dipped behind the trees. The shelter stood behind us, catching the last of the golden light. It looked peaceful, like a promise kept. I leaned back on my hands, feeling the warmth of the fire on my face and the cool earth beneath me. The forest was quiet now, settling into its evening hush. A few birds called softly from the treetops, their songs slow and sleepy. Eli tossed another log onto the fire. Sparks rose into the air, dancing upward like tiny stars. You'll come to love that shelter, he said. Not just for what it does, but for what it means. I turned to him, curious. What does it mean? He looked into the flames. It means you stayed. You didn't run when it got hard. You made something with your hands. You made a place for yourself. I let his words settle in. They felt true. I turned to look at the shelter again. I saw it differently, not just as a structure, but as a marker. A sign that I was no longer just passing through. I was learning to live here, to belong. The golden light softened into amber, then into a dusky blue. Shadows stretched long and slow across the forest floor, and the air cooled with the promise of night. Eli and I sat just outside the shelter, our backs against the rough bark of a fallen log. The fire crackled gently before us, its warmth licking at our boots, casting flickering light across the pine needle-covered ground. I glanced back at the shelter, its sloped roof blending into the trees. It's strange, I said, how something so simple can feel so safe. Eli nodded, his eyes on the fire. It's not the walls that make it safe. It's the care you put into building it, the way it fits the land, the way it holds the night out, just enough to let you rest. I thought about that. The shelter wasn't just a structure. It was a reflection of our effort, our attention, our respect for the place we were in. It was a quiet agreement with the forest. We'll tread lightly, and in return, it will hold us. You ever miss real walls? I asked. A roof that doesn't sway in the wind? Eli smiled faintly. Sometimes. But I've slept under roofs that leaked more than this one, and Ivy felt more alone in a house full of people than I ever have out here. I looked up at the sky. The first stars had begun to appear, scattered like seeds across the deepening blue. The fire popped, sending a few sparks upward to join them. I think I understand that now, I said. There's something about this quiet. It's not empty. It's full of everything I didn't know I needed. Eli leaned back, folding his arms behind his head. That's the forest talking. You're starting to hear it. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the night arrive. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of smoke and pine. An owl called from somewhere high above, its voice low and steady. The river, just beyond the trees, murmured its endless lullaby. Eventually we crawled into the shelter, the pine boughs rustling softly as we settled in. The ground was cool but forgiving, the air inside tinged with the scent of sap and earth. I pulled my blanket around me and let my eyes adjust to the dimness. Outside, the firelight flickered against the walls, casting gentle shadows that danced like old stories. I listened to Eli's breathing slow beside me, steady and calm. And as I lay there, wrapped in warmth and stillness, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Contentment. Not the fleeting kind that comes from comfort or distraction, but the deep, quiet kind that grows from knowing you've done enough for the day, that you've built something with your hands, that you've listened and learned and lived. Sleep came easily, like a leaf settling on water, and the forest, ever watchful, kept its silent vigil. Night had fully embraced the forest, and with it came a symphony of sounds, soft, layered, and alive. I lay in the shelter, wrapped in my blanket, the pine boughs beneath me forming a bed that smelled of sap and earth. The roof above creaked gently in the breeze, a lullaby of wood and wind. Outside, the fire had burned down to glowing coals, their light flickering faintly against the shelter's walls. The warmth had faded, but the memory of it lingered in the air, mingling with the scent of smoke and the cool breath of the forest. A chorus of crickets sang in the underbrush, their rhythm steady and hypnotic. Somewhere nearby, a frog croaked, its voice low and deliberate, like a slow drumbeat in the night. The river, ever present, whispered its secrets just beyond the trees, its current brushing over stones with a sound like silk being drawn through fingers. A breeze stirred the treetops, and the pines responded with a soft shushing, as if the forest were gently reminding the world to rest. Leaves rustled, dry and delicate, like pages turning in an old book. Occasionally, a twig snapped in the distance, perhaps a deer or a fox or something else moving through the shadows with quiet purpose. From high above, an owl called again, its voice echoing through the trees. A long, low note followed by silence. Then another farther off, answering. Their conversation drifted through the night like a thread of ancient language, older than memory. I turned onto my side, facing the open front of the shelter. The stars were visible through the trees, scattered across the sky like tiny lanterns. One blinked, then another, and I imagined them watching over us, keeping time with the forest's breath. Eli stirred beside me, shifting slightly in his sleep. His breathing was slow and even, blending with the sounds of the night. I felt a quiet comfort in his presence. Solid, steady, like the trees themselves. The night sounds didn't disturb me. They soothed me. Each one was a reminder that life continued all around us, even in darkness. That the world didn't stop when the sun went down. It simply changed its rhythm. And as I listened to the forest's gentle music, I felt myself drifting. My thoughts softened, my breath slowed, and the weight of the day melted into the earth beneath me. Sleep came like mist over the river, quiet, cool, and complete. The night deepened, and with it came a richer tapestry of sound, each note a thread in the forest, as quiet lullaby. I lay still in the shelter, eyes closed, listening. The crickets continued their steady rhythm, a soft, high-pitched chorus that pulsed like a heartbeat. Beneath their song, I began to notice other voices, subtle, layered, and alive. A distant coyote called, its cry rising in a long, mournful arc before fading into the hush. Moments later, another answered from across the valley, their voices weaving together like echoes in a canyon. The sound wasn't frightening. It was ancient, familiar, a reminder that we were not alone in this place, and never had been. Closer by, a raccoon rustled through the underbrush, its tiny feet crunching leaves as it searched for food. I could hear the soft snuffling of its nose, the occasional clink of a stone being nudged aside. It moved with purpose, but without urgency, as if it knew the night was long and generous. From the trees above, a screech owl let out a sharp, sudden call, brief and piercing, then gone. The silence that followed was thick and still, as if the forest had paused to listen. Then, slowly, the sounds returned. The rustle of wings, the chirp of a tree frog, the gentle creak of branches swaying in the breeze. A porcupine shuffled somewhere nearby, its movements slow and deliberate. I imagined it nosing through the ferns, its quills brushing softly against the undergrowth. The sound was faint but distinct, like the whisper of a broom across a wooden floor. Even the insects had their own voices. A katydid clicked from a low branch, its call like a tiny wooden rattle. In the distance, a whippoorwill began its namesake song, repeating the phrase over and over, as if reciting a poem to the stars. I opened my eyes and looked out through the shelter's opening. The moon had risen higher, casting silver light across the clearing. The trees stood tall and still, their shadows long and soft. The river glimmered in the distance, its voice steady and soothing. Eli stirred beside me, shifting in his sleep. I could hear his breath, slow and even, blending with the forest's song. I smiled, grateful for the quiet companionship, for the safety of the shelter, for the music of the night. And as I let the sounds carry me, I felt myself drifting again, held not just by the earth beneath me, but by the living world around me. The forest was not silent. It was singing, and I was learning slowly to understand its song. The night deepened into its quietest hours, when the world seemed to hold its breath. I lay still in the shelter, eyes half-lidded, listening to the forest's midnight song. The crickets had softened their chorus, their chirps now spaced like slow, steady heartbeats. In their place, other voices emerged, more subtle, more secretive. A soft rustling in the leaves signaled the passage of a small creature, perhaps a mouse or a shrew, scurrying through the underbrush in search of seeds. Its tiny feet barely disturbed the forest floor, but in the hush of night, even the faintest sound felt amplified. From the riverbank I heard the splash of something entering the water. A beaver, maybe, slipping into the current to patrol its dam. The water rippled and slapped gently against the shore, then stilled again, as if nothing had happened. A barred owl called from deeper in the woods, its voice rich and rolling. "Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all?" The call echoed through the trees, answered by another owl farther away. Their duet was haunting and beautiful, like a lullaby passed down through generations. Then came the yip of a fox, sharp and sudden, breaking the stillness like a spark in the dark. It was followed by silence, then the soft patter of paws on damp leaves, fading into the distance. Above us, bats flitted through the canopy, their wings slicing the air in near silence. I couldn't hear them, but I could feel their presence, quick shadows darting between the stars. The wind picked up slightly, brushing through the treetops with a sighing hush. It carried with it the scent of cool water, damp bark, and the faint sweetness of night-blooming flowers. The shelter creaked softly in response, its pine boughs shifting like a sleeper turning in bed. Eli stirred beside me, murmuring something in his sleep. I turned my head slightly, watching his silhouette in the dim light. Even in rest, he seemed grounded, as if the forest itself had accepted him as one of its own. I closed my eyes again, letting the sounds of the night wash over me. Each one was a thread in the great tapestry of the wilderness, woven together into something ancient, something sacred. And as I drifted once more toward sleep, I felt myself becoming part of that tapestry, not just a visitor, but a note in the song, a breath in the wind, a heartbeat in the hush. Morning came not with a jolt, but with a slow, golden unfolding. I stirred beneath my blanket as the first light filtered through the pine boughs of our shelter. It wasn't the brightness that woke me, but the change in the air, the subtle shift from the cool breath of night to the soft warmth of dawn. The forest, too, was beginning to stir. The night's symphony had faded into a hush, replaced by the tentative notes of morning. A robin called from a nearby branch, its song clear and hopeful, like a bell ringing in the distance. A squirrel chattered overhead, rustling through the canopy as it leapt from limb to limb. The river, ever constant, whispered its familiar tune, now joined by the gentle splash of a deer stepping into the shallows for a drink. I sat up slowly, stretching my arms toward the sky. The shelter had held through the night, its roof still intact, the pine-scented air inside cool and clean. I could see Eli already outside, crouched by the fire pit, coaxing the embers back to life with practiced ease. "Sleep well?" he asked, not looking up. I nodded, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. "Better than I have in a long time." He smiled faintly, feeding a few dry twigs into the fire. "That's what the forest does. It takes the weight off your shoulders if you let it." I stepped out into the clearing, the dew-damp grass cool beneath my boots. The sun had just begun to rise above the treetops, casting long beams of light through the mist that hovered over the ground. Everything shimmered, leaves, stones, even the air itself, as if the world had been gently polished overnight. Birdsong filled the space between the trees, each note a greeting, a declaration of life. A woodpecker tapped rhythmically on a distant trunk. Insects buzzed softly in the underbrush, and the breeze carried the scent of damp earth, wildflowers, and smoke. I crouched by the river and splashed cold water on my face. It shocked me awake, but in a good way. Like the forest reminding me that I was alive, that this was a new day, and I was lucky to greet it. Eli handed me a tin cup of pine tea, the steam curling into the morning air. I took it gratefully, wrapping my hands around the warmth. "We'll check the traps after breakfast," he said. "Then move upstream. I've got a feeling about today." I nodded, sipping the tea. It was bitter and earthy but comforting, the kind of drink that didn't need sugar or spice to be good. It just was. We sat in silence for a while, watching the sun rise higher, watching the forest come alive. And in that stillness, I felt something settle inside me. A quiet readiness, a sense of belonging. The night had passed, the day had begun, and I was here for it, fully. The morning unfolded slowly, like a page turning in a well-worn book. The forest, bathed in soft gold, seemed to stretch and yawn with us as we began our day. After sipping the last of our pine tea, Eli and I moved through the quiet rhythm of our morning rituals. Simple acts that had become as familiar as breath. First came the fire. Eli knelt beside the embers, coaxing them back to life with a few dry twigs and a patient breath. I watched the smoke curl upward, catching the morning light in soft spirals. The fire crackled to life again, its warmth spreading outward in gentle pulses. While the flames grew, I stepped down to the river's edge. The water was cold, but I welcomed it. I cupped my hands and splashed it over my face, the chill waking my senses. The shock of it was bracing, but it left me feeling clean, renewed. I stood for a moment, letting the droplets run down my neck, watching the ripples fade into the current. Back at camp, I laid out our gear to dry in the sun, blankets, boots, and the damp edges of our packs. The scent of pine and smoke clung to everything, a comforting reminder of where we were and how far we'd come. Eli handed me a small strip of dried meat and a piece of flatbread. "Eat slow," he said. "Let your body wake up with the day." We sat on a log, chewing in silence, watching the forest come alive. A chipmunk darted across the clearing, pausing to sniff the air before disappearing into a tangle of roots. A pair of jays squabbled in the branches above, their feathers flashing blue in the sunlight. After breakfast, we checked our gear. Eli ran his hands over the seams of his pack, tightening straps, checking for wear. I did the same, mimicking his movements, learning by watching. My fingers were more sure now, my eyes quicker to notice what needed fixing. Then came the quiet moment of stillness, our final ritual before setting out. We stood at the edge of the clearing, facing the forest. Eli closed his eyes for a breath, and I followed. The wind brushed past us, cool and clean. The trees swayed gently, their leaves whispering secrets we could almost understand. It wasn't prayer, exactly. It was presence. A pause to acknowledge the land, to thank it for sheltering us, and to promise we'd tread lightly as we moved forward. Eli opened his eyes and looked at me. "Ready?" I nodded. "Yeah, I think I am." And with that, we hoisted our packs, doused the fire, and stepped back into the trees. The morning rituals had done their work. We were awake, grounded, and open to whatever the day would bring. We stepped away from the shelter, leaving behind the soft imprint of our rest and the fading warmth of the morning fire. The forest greeted us like an old friend, familiar, yet always full of quiet surprises. The trail ahead was dappled with sunlight, filtered through a canopy of pine and aspen. The trees stood tall and still, their trunks rising like pillars in a cathedral of green. Shafts of golden light pierced the branches, illuminating floating motes of dust and pollen that danced in the air like tiny spirits. The ground beneath our boots was soft with needles and moss, muffling our steps. Each footfall felt respectful, as though we were walking not on the earth, but with it. Birdsong echoed through the trees, warblers, thrushes, and the occasional sharp call of a jay. Their melodies wove together into a gentle chorus, rising and falling with the breeze. A woodpecker tapped in the distance, its rhythm steady and sure, like a heartbeat in the woods. The scent of the forest was rich and layered, pine resin warmed by the sun, damp earth still holding the memory of the night's dew, the faint sweetness of wildflowers blooming in the undergrowth. Every breath felt like a gift, grounding and clean. Eli walked ahead, his silhouette framed by the light. He moved with ease, his steps sure, his eyes always scanning, reading the land like a familiar story. I followed, letting my senses open, trying to see what he saw, hear what he heard. A squirrel darted across the path, its tail a blur of motion. It paused on a low branch, chattered at us, then vanished into the leaves. A butterfly fluttered past, its wings catching the light in flashes of orange and black. We paused at a small clearing where the sun pooled on the forest floor. Eli knelt to examine a set of tracks, delicate impressions in the soft earth. "Deer," he said quietly. "2 of them, moving east." I crouched beside him, tracing the prints with my eyes. They were fresh, the edges still crisp. I imagined the deer moving through the trees just before dawn, their hooves silent, their breath steaming in the cool air. We stood again and continued on, the forest gently closing around us. The trail narrowed, winding between ferns and fallen logs, past clusters of mushrooms and the occasional burst of wild berries. The deeper we walked, the more I felt the forest settle into me. Its rhythm became my rhythm, its silence, my silence. And as we moved forward, I felt not like a traveler passing through, but like someone returning to a place I had always known. The forest welcomed us with open arms as we stepped deeper into its embrace. The morning light filtered through the canopy in golden shafts, and with each step, the world around us seemed to breathe and stir. It wasn't too long before we began to notice the quiet presence of the forest inhabitants. A family of wild turkeys moved through the underbrush ahead, their feathers catching the light in soft bronze and copper hues. The mother led the way, her head bobbing with each step, while her chicks followed in a loose, peeping line. They paused briefly to scratch at the earth, then disappeared into the ferns with barely a sound. High above, a red squirrel chattered from a branch, its tail flicking with energy. It scurried along the limbs of a spruce, leaping from tree to tree with practiced ease. It paused to peer down at us, then vanished into the green. Eli raised a hand, signaling me to stop. He pointed silently to a patch of sunlight ahead. There, standing still as stone, was a young doe. Her ears twitched, alert, but she didn't flee. She watched us with wide, dark eyes, her breath visible in the cool morning air. For a moment, we simply stood there, sharing the space. Then, with a flick of her tail, she turned and bounded away, her hooves barely touching the ground. We continued on, our steps quiet, our eyes open. A garter snake slithered across the trail, its scales glinting like polished jade. It paused to taste the air with its flickering tongue, then disappeared beneath a fallen log. Nearby, a chorus of frogs croaked from a hidden pond, their voices rising and falling in a lazy rhythm. A pair of ravens circled overhead, their wings slicing through the sky with effortless grace. One called out, a deep, throaty croak that echoed through the trees. Eli looked up and nodded. "Smart birds," he said. "They know more than they let on." As we passed a sunlit clearing, a fox emerged from the shadows. Its coat was a rich, rusty red, its eyes sharp and curious. It paused, nose twitching, then trotted off with a quiet elegance, its white-tipped tail trailing behind like a brushstroke. Every creature we encountered moved with purpose, yet without haste. They were not startled by us, only aware. We were part of the landscape now, not intruders, but fellow travelers. And as we walked on, I felt a growing sense of connection, not just to the land, but to the life it held. The forest was not empty. It was full of stories, of movement, of quiet lives unfolding in the dappled light. The forest had grown quiet again, the kind of quiet that feels full rather than empty. We had been walking for some time, following a narrow game trail that wound through a grove of aspen trees. Their white trunks stood like sentinels, their leaves trembling in the breeze, whispering secrets to one another. Eli paused ahead of me, raising a hand. I stopped mid-step, my boot hovering above the ground. His eyes were fixed on something just beyond a thicket of ferns. I followed his gaze. There, not 20 paces away, stood a black bear. It hadn't seen us yet. It was young, perhaps 2 years old, its coat glossy and thick, catching the light in soft waves. It stood on its hind legs, sniffing the air, then dropped back down and began pawing at a fallen log, searching for grubs or beetles beneath the bark. My breath caught in my throat, not from fear, but awe. The bear moved with such quiet strength, its presence commanding yet unthreatening. It was not a beast to be feared, but a creature simply living its life, as much a part of this place as the trees and the river. Eli didn't move. He stood still, calm, his body relaxed. I mirrored him, trusting his stillness more than my own instincts. The bear paused, lifting its head. Its nose twitched, catching our scent. For a moment, it looked directly at us, its eyes dark and curious, not alarmed. We stood in silence, the three of us suspended in a moment of mutual recognition. Then, with a slow turn, the bear ambled away, disappearing into the trees with barely a sound. The forest seemed to exhale, the tension melting into the breeze. Eli finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "That was a gift." I nodded, still watching the place where the bear had vanished. "It didn't seem afraid." "No," he said, "and neither were we. That's how it should be." We stood there a little longer, letting the moment settle. The forest resumed its rhythm, birds calling, leaves rustling, a woodpecker tapping in the distance. As we continued on, I felt changed, not in a dramatic way, but in the quiet way that only the forest can offer. That bear had reminded me of something I was just beginning to understand, that we are not separate from this world, but part of it. That when we move gently, the wild does not retreat, it meets us. We walked in silence for a while after the bear encounter, each of us wrapped in our own thoughts. The forest seemed to honor the moment too, its sounds soft and reverent, as if it understood the weight of what had just passed. The trail narrowed, winding through a grove of fir trees where the light filtered down in soft green hues. The air was cool and still, carrying the scent of damp needles and the faint sweetness of decaying wood. Every breath felt grounding, like the forest was gently drawing us back into its rhythm. Eli finally spoke, his voice low and thoughtful. "You handled that well." I glanced over at him. "I didn't really do anything." He gave a small smile. "Exactly." I let that settle in. There was a lesson there, quiet but clear. Sometimes the best thing to do was nothing at all, just to be still, to observe, to respect. As we moved on, the forest began to open up again. A small meadow appeared ahead, bathed in sunlight and dotted with wildflowers, lupine, yarrow, and goldenrod, swaying gently in the breeze. A pair of butterflies danced above the blossoms, their wings brushing like petals in the air. We paused at the edge of the clearing. A woodchuck sat on a sun-warmed rock, grooming its fur with tiny, deliberate paws. It looked up at us, blinked slowly, then returned to its task, unbothered by our presence. Eli crouched and motioned for me to do the same. "Watch how it moves," he whispered. "See how it listens before it acts?" I nodded, studying the creature. Its ears twitched with every sound, the buzz of a bee, the rustle of grass, the distant call of a hawk, and yet it remained calm, grounded in its place. "It knows the forest," Eli said, "knows when to run and when to stay." I thought about how often I'd rushed through life, reacting without listening, moving without seeing. Out here, everything was slower, more deliberate, and in that slowness, there was wisdom. The woodchuck eventually waddled off into the tall grass, disappearing with a flick of its tail. We stood and continued on, the sun warming our backs, the forest stretching ahead like a path through a dream. And as we walked, I carried the morning with me. The bear's quiet gaze, the woodchuck's stillness, the hush of the trees. Each moment a thread, weaving itself into the fabric of who I was becoming. The trail opened suddenly, as if the forest had drawn back a curtain to reveal a hidden world. Before us stretched a wide, sun-drenched meadow, cradled gently between two low ridges. It was the kind of place that felt untouched, as though time had passed it by, leaving it to bloom in quiet solitude. The grasses swayed in slow waves, their golden blades catching the morning light like threads of silk. Scattered among them were wildflowers in full bloom, delicate bluebells nodding in the breeze, clusters of white yarrow, and the deep purples of lupine standing tall like sentinels. Here and there, bright orange Indian paintbrushes flared like tiny fires, and the soft pinks of wild roses peeked from the edges of the clearing. The air was warm and sweet, filled with the scent of sun-warmed grass, pollen, and the faintest trace of mint from low-growing herbs. Bees moved lazily from flower to flower, their wings humming a soft, contented tune. A monarch butterfly drifted past, its wings opening and closing like slow breaths. We stepped into the meadow, our boots brushing through the tall grass. The earth was soft beneath us, springy with life. I could feel the warmth of the sun on my face, the coolness of the breeze on my neck, and the gentle tug of the wind as it played with the loose strands of my hair. Eli paused near a flat stone and set down his pack. "We'll rest here a bit," he said, lowering himself to sit. "Let the sun do its work." I followed, settling into the grass beside him. The meadow buzzed with life, but it wasn't loud. It was a gentle, living quiet, filled with the rustle of wings, the chirp of grasshoppers, the distant call of a meadowlark. A pair of deer emerged from the far side of the clearing, their coats glowing in the sunlight. They moved slowly, grazing, their ears flicking at every sound. One lifted its head and looked in our direction. We didn't move. After a moment, it returned to its meal, accepting our presence as part of the morning. I lay back in the grass, staring up at the sky. It was a soft, endless blue, brushed with wisps of white cloud. The sun warmed my skin, and the scent of crushed clover rose around me. I closed my eyes and let the meadow hold me. Eli's voice came, quiet and thoughtful. "Places like this, they remind you what peace really feels like." I nodded, eyes still closed. "It's like the world is breathing and we're just lying in its heartbeat." He didn't reply, but I heard the smile in his silence. And so we stayed there, for a long while, doing nothing but listening, breathing, and being. The meadow didn't ask for anything. It simply offered its beauty, its stillness, its quiet joy. The sun began its slow descent behind the distant ridge, and the meadow softened with it. The golden light that had bathed the grasses all afternoon deepened into amber, then into a warm, honeyed glow that seemed to melt over every leaf and petal. We remained in the same spot, still and quiet, as if moving might disturb the delicate balance of the moment. The meadow, so full of life just hours before, now seemed to exhale, settling into a hush that mirrored our own. The wildflowers turned their faces toward the last of the light, their colors glowing more vividly in the low sun. Purples deepened, yellows turned to gold, and the whites of the yarrow took on a soft, pearly hue. The grasses swayed in slow motion, their tips catching the light like threads of fire. Above us, the sky transformed into a canvas of color. Hues of rose, tangerine, and lavender stretched across the horizon, blending into one another like watercolor on wet paper. Wisps of cloud caught the light and glowed from within, drifting lazily across the sky. A hush fell over the birdsong. The meadowlarks gave one last call before settling into their nests. Crickets began to chirp again, their evening chorus rising gently from the tall grass. A nighthawk swooped low, its wings slicing the air in silence, then vanished into the growing dusk. Eli sat with his knees drawn up, arms resting loosely across them. He watched the sky with the quiet reverence of someone who had seen 1,000 sunsets and still found each one worth pausing for. "Never gets old," he said softly, as if speaking too loudly might scare the colors away. "It's like the world is tucking itself in." He smiled at that. "That's exactly what it is." The breeze cooled as the sun slipped lower, brushing against our skin like a soft blanket. The shadows stretched long across the meadow, and the trees at its edge stood in silhouette, their outlines sharp against the glowing sky. I lay back in the grass, watching the stars begin to appear, first one, then another, then a dozen more. The sky darkened to a deep indigo, and the first hints of night settled in. The fireflies came next, blinking to life in the tall grass, their lights flickering like tiny lanterns. They moved slowly, lazily, as if they too were savoring the last warmth of the day. We didn't speak again. We didn't need to. The meadow was speaking for us, in color and light, in breeze and birdsong, in the hush that only comes when the day is done and the world is ready to rest. And as the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, I felt a deep, quiet peace settle over me, like the meadow itself had wrapped me in its arms and whispered, "You are safe. You are home." As the last light of the sun slipped behind the hills, the meadow transformed once again. The colors faded into soft blues and silvers, and the hush of twilight gave way to the gentle stirrings of night. We remained in the meadow, choosing to sleep beneath the stars. The shelter of the trees was close by, but something about the openness of the field, the way the sky stretched endlessly above us, felt right. We laid our bedrolls on a patch of soft grass, still warm from the day's sun, and let the night settle around us. The sounds began slowly, like the first notes of a lullaby. Crickets resumed their steady chorus, their chirps rising and falling in waves, as if the earth itself were breathing. From the far edge of the meadow, a whippoorwill began its rhythmic call, soft, persistent, echoing across the open space. Its voice was joined by the distant trill of a tree frog, hidden somewhere in the reeds near the river. A breeze moved through the tall grasses, creating a gentle rustling that sounded like whispers in a language I almost understood. The stalks brushed against one another, swaying in time with the wind's quiet rhythm. Somewhere nearby, a family of coyotes began to yip and howl, their voices rising in playful, eerie harmony. The sound echoed off the hills, wild and beautiful, then faded into the distance, leaving behind a deeper silence. Above us, bats flitted through the air, their wings slicing the sky in near silence. Occasionally, I'd catch the faintest flutter, like the turning of a page. Fireflies blinked lazily in the grass, their lights pulsing in no particular pattern, like stars that had fallen to earth. Eli lay beside me, his hat pulled low, his breathing slow and even. I could tell he was still awake, listening, just as I was. "Funny," I whispered. "I used to think the night was quiet." He chuckled softly. "It is. You're just hearing more of it now." I smiled, letting the sounds wash over me. The meadow was alive, but not in a way that demanded attention. It was a gentle aliveness, a world moving at its own pace, unconcerned with anything but the turning of the earth and the rising of the moon. The stars above multiplied, filling the sky with their quiet light. I watched them blink and shimmer, their presence steady and ancient. The moon rose slowly, casting a silver glow across the meadow, turning the grasses into waves of light. I closed my eyes, letting the sounds of the night carry me. The crickets, the frogs, the wind, the distant calls of unseen creatures, all of it blended into a soft, endless song. And as I drifted into sleep, I felt as though I were floating, not on a bedroll in a field, but on the breath of the forest itself, held gently by the night. The night wrapped around us like a soft blanket, and the meadow, once golden with sunlight, now shimmered under the silver gaze of the moon. The stars above blinked gently, scattered across the sky like lanterns hung by unseen hands. I lay on my back, cocooned in my blanket, the scent of crushed grass and wildflowers rising around me. The earth was cool beneath me, but not cold, just enough to remind me I was grounded, held by something older and wiser than myself. The night sounds continued their gentle rhythm. Crickets chirped in waves, frogs sang from the river's edge, and the grasses whispered with every passing breeze. The world was alive, but not restless. It moved with the slow, steady breath of sleep. Beside me, Eli had long since drifted off, his breathing deep and even. I could hear the occasional shift of his blanket, the soft exhale of someone at peace. I let my eyes close, my body sinking deeper into the earth's embrace. My thoughts, once busy and tangled, now floated like leaves on a still pond. I didn't try to hold on to them. I let them drift one by one, until there was only quiet. The meadow held me gently, its sounds and scents weaving into my dreams. I felt the warmth of the day still lingering in the soil, the cool kiss of night on my cheeks, the soft rustle of wings overhead as an owl passed silently through the sky. And then sleep came, not as a sudden drop, but as a slow, sweet surrender. My breath matched the rhythm of the forest. My heart slowed, my body softened. In that moment, I wasn't just in the meadow. I was part of it. And the night, kind and watchful, kept me safe until morning. The morning after the rendezvous was quiet, as if the forest itself had paused to reflect. The fires had burned low, and the voices that had filled the night now rested in silence. I sat up slowly, the weight of sleep still clinging to my limbs. The forest welcomed us with its familiar hush, the trail ahead winding gently through the undergrowth. As we walked, I felt the rhythm return, the crunch of pine needles beneath our boots, the whisper of wind through the branches, the distant call of a jay. The days that followed were quieter. The land had shifted again, warmed by the sun, softened by the rains. We moved slowly, not out of weariness, but out of respect. Each step was deliberate, each pause a chance to listen. We found a new camp near a bend in the river, where the water slowed and the trees leaned close. The ground was soft with moss, and the air carried the scent of wild mint and damp stone. Built the shelter with practiced ease, and I helped without needing instruction. Our movements had become a kind of dance, each knowing what the other needed. At night the fire crackled gently and the stars blinked overhead. We spoke little, but the silence between us was full of memory, of understanding, of the quiet bond formed in shared experience. I thought often of the city, of the life I had left behind. It felt distant now, like a story I had once read but no longer believed. Out here, the world was simpler, not easier, but clearer. If you've enjoyed this journey, please give it a like and subscribe for more gentle stories to help you unwind. Sleep well.